Hi, thanks for coming to my channel. First of all, about the live stream yesterday, I thought it went well. There was good participation, so thank you to everyone who came to that. And apologies if you missed it. It was a bit later than the scheduled time because I had Wi-Fi problems, but I thought it went well, so I'll try to do that periodically. Um, just a disclaimer here to YouTube, because I touched on the subject before and YouTube actually sanctioned me over it because they misunderstood what the point of the video was. So, just to be absolutely clear to YouTube, I am not promoting any theories. I am not contradicting medical advice. Okay? What I am doing here is challenging how conspiracy theories can distract people, how they can, in my view, potentially be dangerous. So, YouTube admins, please don't misunderstand this video like you done last time. Because I'm not breaking any community guidelines here. But, and I'm talking to my subscribers here, I think the issues are important to talk about. Um, so where to begin? Well, what is a conspiracy theory? It's, I guess, the best way to sum it up is an idea, a theory, that there is truth beyond official explanations, that the reality of something is not as officially described. And by definition, therefore, there is a conspiracy, a cover up. Um, Obviously, there's some very famous ones. There is the JFK assassination conspiracy theories. With the bigger ones, there's certainly more than one. There's the death of Princess Diana. There's the moon landing was fake. There's the 9/11 conspiracy theories. Um, they'd probably be some of the better known ones, but there's many others. Too many to name here. I've just covered some of the main ones there. Um, and right now, as we're going through this pandemic, there is an increasing movement to question official medical information and so on. And frankly, I find it quite concerning, um, because I think when people go down the rabbit hole, it's very hard to go back. And it's almost like the effects of being in a cult. Um, this isn't just something that's a bit, oh, well, they're not thinking clearly, or uh, they're coming out with these outlandish ideas. It's potentially dangerous. We've seen that with what happened on January the 6th in the US Capitol. The effects of a group like QAnon. Um, and again, YouTube, I'm not promoting them, I'm doing the exact opposite. But what's striking about this, and I think those of us who kind of observe, those of us who, um, look at this with concern, I think we need to avoid assuming that people who get into this stuff are idiots, that they are very impressionable, or that they are not intelligent people. More often than not, they're normal people. They are of average intelligence. Sometimes they're university educated. They're not, so it's not a case that they're really have learning difficulties or something, and therefore they're impressionable. That's not the case. And I speak from experience. I know people in my life, some of them quite close to me, who definitely go down that rabbit hole. And in at least one case, it's someone that I'm not saying I'm super close to this person, but you know, um, she's someone I care about enough to be concerned about this. And I guess everyone can relate that. There was that nurse, I forget her name now, but she was leading anti-vax protests in London, and she's a former nurse. So if a former nurse can do that, in my opinion, she was inciting violence against doctors and nurses by invoking Nuremberg and saying that war criminals were hanged, i.e., this is the fate that awaits you. I believe it was incitement. Um, but what's concerning is we can't just dismiss this as a couple of people on the fringe. These are sizable minorities. They are minorities, but they're sizable minorities, and that's concerning. And we've seen it all over the world, but particularly interestingly enough in developed countries, in Australia, in France, in I think it was Austria, in Britain, of course, in the United States, and elsewhere. But I think that people, well, let me put it this way. I'm not one to totally dismiss conspiracy theories outright, at least not as a general approach. I don't say, oh, that's just rubbish. You don't know what you're talking about. I think that in history, in the corridors of power, there is evidence of cover-ups. There is evidence of scandals. There is evidence of covert operations. This is certainly true of the CIA and respective American governments, and it's almost certainly true of other governments as well. So I think it would be naive to say, "Oh, it's everything is as officially explained." That's, history proves otherwise. Um, and I don't think you need to be a conspiracy theorist to see that. Incidentally, when I challenged one of the people I know about some of his views, he claimed that the CIA invented this term conspiracy theorist. I don't know if that's true or not. It might be true. That doesn't mean, oh well, because they coined the term, therefore there's everything we say is true. Of course not. But this is one of the problems when you start getting into this domain of believing in a conspiracy. People want to vindicate themselves. They want it to be true. So what they do is, you'll hear the argument, oh, I've done my own research. Well, they will. They'll have done research, but the question is, what are your sources? What are you looking at? And if they're looking at blogs or supposed first-hand testimonials or so-called experts, quite often that's questionable that they are actually experts. But if you have a source that is gravitating towards the conspiracy, then they're much more likely to look at that and endorse it. Anything that's official, i.e., a government source or a source from an institution like the NHS, they will question because they say it's all part of the plot. So at that point, when they start questioning everything, that's when it becomes dangerous because they're not allowing themselves to think critically. What they're doing is saying the official source cannot be true because it's part of the conspiracy. And if you try to reason with them, but this is based on empirical evidence, then they will never directly answer a question. They'll just throw back something. They'll keep throwing back, throwing back, throwing back with more questions or with more little avenues of this rabbit tunnel, this rabbit hole. Um, so to me, the danger is that they're not allowing themselves to think critically, not allowing themselves to step back a little bit and think, well, is this really conceivable? Or maybe it's just a case that people are frustrated. For example, in the case of COVID, they're frustrated with restrictions. So rather than saying these are necessary restrictions, or at least some of them may be, as a measure to contain a deadly virus, it's easier to say it's actually a big plot by billionaires like Bill Gates and George Soros to keep us under control. I mean, that's a lot more exotic and interesting than accepting it is what it is, which is a deadly pandemic. Or they might accept that it's a deadly pandemic, but they may question the vaccines, even though the vast majority of people have not had serious side effects. I mean, I can say I've had two jabs, I'm fine. Moderna. The second jab, I did get a little bit feverish. I felt a little bit weak that night. That was it. And that's true of the vast majority of people who take these. But what the conspiracy theorists will do is they will ignore the majority and they'll home in on maybe, let's say, for example, you have 1,000 people, just to use a sort of demographic. And let's say 950 of them Okay, and I'm allowing a big minority here. Let's say 950 of them have zero side effects, but 50 of them report feeling dizzy, or let's say one or two of those people die. Now, what the conspiracy theorists will do, say, look, that person died after taking this vaccine, that proves it's dangerous. They ignore the fact that maybe that individual had pre-existing conditions which were exacerbated with the vaccine, you know, because accepting that the majority were fine wouldn't tap into the narrative. It wouldn't tie with the narrative. Um, Another example of this is September 11th. You know, we've just had the 20th anniversary. Um, I see people desperately trying to prove, for example, that there was no planes, even though we know the names of the passengers on those planes. The relatives of those passengers grieve every year. Those names are on the memorials. And contrary to the claims, there is actually footage. For example, I came across this claim the other day that there's no footage from the Pentagon. Well, that's not true. I've seen it. I've seen footage of the wreckage strewn around, including part of the tail wing of American 77, which was um, the aircraft that crashed at that site. And there's a famous, I think it was a parking lot footage of the orange blast on impact. So often the claims that conspiracy theorists make are simply not true. But if you counter that, if you show them the evidence, they'll say, oh, that's fake. Another one that's perhaps less dangerous, but it's um, pretty absurd, is the flat Earth people. Now, their narrative is all the photos from NASA, all of them, are just fake. It's part of they hired Hollywood directors just to create those photos, even though you can actually physically see the curvature of the Earth at certain altitudes. Um, but I find a common characteristic with people who endorse these movements is they sort of see themselves as brave outsiders questioning power. Now, what I say is it is healthy to question power in a democracy. That's important. Like I said, I don't 100% dismiss conspiracies. Certainly, in the case of the Kennedy assassination, there is a lot of things there that don't add up. And actually, the majority of Americans now, like mainstream opinion, is that there was a conspiracy. So that's not outlandish. Could it be that 50 years from now, there will be information about September 11th, well, let's try 30 years from now, is a lot more mainstream that people kind of accept? Maybe, but as it stands, we know the people who died in those four aircraft. We know that there was recordings, for example, from the cabin crew members like Betsy Young. This is verifiable empirical evidence. Now, if you want to say that it's all fake, then by extension you have to say all those people were actors and all the people who died in those planes didn't exist. Well, feel free to tell the relatives that, because this is something I really have a problem with when it gets into this realm of conspiracy theories. You know, in trying to find the truth, they don't realize how hurtful they are being potentially to relatives. Now, I suspect relatives of these incidents, these tragedies, just want nothing to do with them. But put it this way, if I lost a loved one in a major terror attack, and there were people saying, oh, that never happened, I would be pretty angry. Another example of this is mass shootings, when you get particularly hardcore advocates of the gun lobby. They will say that survivors of mass shootings are crisis actors, and they've just been orchestrated by powerful left wing groups in order to get gun control. So they're just acting, they're just pretending to cry, they're just pretending to grieve. I think that is beyond despicable. And this is one thing about conspiracy theorists. I would urge them to just step back a little bit and consider how hurtful your claims are. You could say it's free speech, you could say it's just your opinion. But when you're questioning people's actual experience, well, be prepared to have hard evidence for that. And so often they just don't, or rather they ignore evidence. If you want to be really a critical thinker, then you'll be open minded. You'll accept evidence as it is presented to you. You won't question all evidence. That's not being open minded. That is not doing your own research. That is just being stubborn. Um, but I'm a little concerned about where some of these things go because we've seen that some of them end up as violent movements like QAnon. And, these things split up families. In fact, the son of that nurse I mentioned, he said that his mother is beyond trying to see reason at this point. So it's a very dangerous thing. And I try to not demonize conspiracy theorists. I try to sort of see where they're coming from. They're fed up, they're cynical. They genuinely, sincerely believe there's very high level industrial scale abuse of power because there has been in history, and there may even be today. But if you are simply looking for information to vindicate what you believe, that's not being open minded. If you're saying that key aspects of, for example, a terror attack are not true, then just consider that in the case of September 11th, the people on those four planes, the famous crew and passengers of United 93, there is a national memorial at that site. If it's all some giant cover up, then by extension, you have to believe that the entire thing is just a facade. Now, what is the chances of that? Remote. And also, what do you say to grieving relatives? Are you going to tell them their tears are fake? Are you going to tell them that they were not really passengers on those planes? Or you might accept that there were planes, but might say they were shot down. Okay, that's less that's less outlandish, less callous, and it is knowing that Dick Cheney um, was consulted on whether or not to shoot down planes, and I think in the end, I think it was Cheney as opposed to Bush, um, decided against shooting down United 93. Um, so summed up, I am not saying that people can't ask questions. I am not saying that absolutely everything is always what governments say it is. Politicians lie. It does happen. But I also think that people need to be very, very careful about going down this rabbit hole. If you find yourself so cynical that you're simply questioning everything, then that's the point where you need to step back a little bit and think, well, what are the chances of this entire thing, everything, being just made up by some sinister organizations? I mean, if you believe that Bill Gates is trying to put microchips into vaccines, the natural follow up is why? Well, population control? Okay, well, then it follows up the vaccines would have to kill people. And the overwhelming majority of people who get them are fine. I mean, I can tell you that. You might say I'm a liar, but I've had two vaccines. Are you going to say that every single person in this country, and Britain's had a very good rollout rate, are you going to say that every single person who has had those vaccines were just making it up? He didn't really get the vaccines. Think about that. And if you concede that we're telling the truth that we've got the vaccines, then you have to accept that your notion that vaccines are dangerous is misplaced or at least exaggerated. It's reckless, it's scaremongering to tell people that because a minority of people might have negative side effects, then the whole thing is dangerous. And to go to the point of attacking or threatening doctors and nurses is is despicable when these are people who are working long, long hours for the public good. Um, on issues like concerning liberty, for example, vaccine passports. I think there is a legitimate debate over that. I think that there are legitimate questions over the balancing act between maintaining liberty and practical public safety. I think there is absolutely debate for that. So I wouldn't, attack anyone for simply asking questions in terms of that. I will take issue with people who are just disregarding the fact that 135,000 people in this country have died from COVID. Are you going to say that every single one of them, oh, well, they were old or they had pre existing conditions? Are you really going to make that claim? Yes, seasonal flu kills people, but I don't think, certainly not in modern times, has seasonal flu killed that many. Um, and I know that, you could probably dismiss me. You'll say, oh, I'm working for the government or something. But all I am saying is show a little humility, accept that you don't know everything. And this conclusion that it's all one big plot is a very, very um, extravagant claim. You need to weigh it up a little bit. Consider the plausibility of what you're saying. Like, really, really consider it. I mean, what is the plausibility that Bill Gates, wealthy man as he is, would want to put microchips into the bodies of millions of people? Think about that. Rationalize that a little bit. This is a man who's, given millions to help malaria victims in Africa. Um, is your cynicism such you would believe that he would? I don't even know how to process that, to be honest. Anyway, I'll conclude this. YouTube, I really hope you don't misunderstand this video. But that's what I think. If you have a relative or you know someone who is going down this rabbit hole, as I do, probably most people do at this point. I think it's important not to vilify them. Don't just call them an idiot. Um, be respectful insofar as accepting that their views are sincere, that they genuinely, genuinely believe this stuff. But when possible, I do think it's valid to challenge them. Really, really put them on the spot and say, well, what about people who've suffered? What about people who've lost loved ones? What are you going to say to them? And see what they say. I'm not saying get into confrontation. In my case, one of the people I know who is of this mindset, um, it's actually, you know, a situation where I don't want to get into that confrontation because, I mean, I think he's dead wrong about a lot of things he comes out with, but it's just, put it this way, you need to choose your battles. You need to choose your battles. It's actually, well, I volunteer in a shop and I don't want to go into the name of the business and all that because it'll get people will, it's not, I don't think it's diplomatic for online purposes, but suffice to say, a work colleague believed this and I don't hate the guy, but I just think it's very sad that he is of this persuasion. And when he brings it up, when he starts talking about this stuff, I change the subject. So, I guess I'm countering what I've just said. There are times when you need to choose your battles as well, and sometimes it is practical to change it. In the case of family members, husbands, wives, children, parents, siblings, cousins, again, I mean, in my case, there's no one very, very close to me, but if it was someone that I really, really cared about, let's say a girlfriend, and she was to go down this rabbit hole, I would definitely, definitely be not pressuring her, not forcing her, but I would definitely be talking to her about the issues and trying to get her to see reason. Because they've seen their family members go down this rabbit hole, and it's a very sad thing, very sad thing. So, people just have critical thinking, sure, ask questions, but don't lose the plot. Be reasonable, be rational. Just don't have this conclusion that every single thing is fake or not real or part of a conspiracy, because it's not. It's just not.